What if the greatest empire in modern history wasn't built on tanks, troops, or missiles? What if the most powerful weapon of conquest wasn't a bullet, but a bank loan? For decades, we've been fed a story, a narrative that global power is won through military might, through sheer force. But what if that's just a distraction, a shiny object waved in front of our eyes to keep us from looking behind the curtain? What if the real conquest, the true takeover, happens not on battlefields, but in silent, polished boardrooms, in distant government offices, sealed with a handshake and a signature on a deal that shackles nations with debt? This is the story of how America built an invisible empire. An empire not of territory, but of pure, unassailable economic control. An empire conquered without ever firing a single bullet. The primary weapon in this silent conquest is debt trap diplomacy. Here's how it works, according to former economic hitman John Perkins. The target, a developing nation rich in natural resources like oil, like Ecuador, Indonesia, or Panama. The agents, highly educated, smooth-talking economic hitmen, or EHMs. Their mission? To seduce and convince national leaders to accept enormous loans from international organizations like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, IMF. These loans, often billions of dollars, are promised for massive infrastructure projects like power grids, highways, industrial ports. But there's a catch. The contracts for these projects are almost always awarded to massive U.S. corporations like Bechtel, Halliburton, and Stone & Webster. The money never really leaves the American system. It just goes from the bank to the foreign government and directly into the pockets of U.S. companies. So the country gets its shiny new infrastructure, but it's left with a catastrophic, unpayable debt. The economic forecasts provided by the EHMs were often wildly exaggerated or outright falsified. The projected growth never materializes for the average citizen. Now, the trap is sprung. When the country inevitably can't repay its loans, the United States and these international financial institutions step in as the collections agency. They demand their pound of flesh in the form of austerity measures. Privatization, which basically means forcing the sale of national assets like water, electricity, and oil rights to U.S. corporations at fire sale prices. Deregulation, stripping away environmental and labor laws to make it cheaper for corporations to operate. Political favors, demanding support for U.S. foreign policy goals at the UN or granting access to military bases. This is modern imperialism. This is economic colonialism. The country remains technically independent, but its economic sovereignty is gone. It becomes a client state, servient to U.S. interests. This system is what Perkins calls the corporatocracy, a powerful alliance of government, banking, and corporate interests that profit from this cycle of debt. But what happens when a patriotic leader refuses to play the game? What happens when they reject the loans and try to use their nation's resources for their own people? Perkins claims that's when the CIA jackals are sent in. These are covert operatives whose job is to engineer regime change through propaganda, bribes, coups, and even assassination. Perkins points to the suspicious plane crashes of two leaders who oppose this system, Panama's Omar Torrijos and Ecuador's Jaime Roldos. If the jackals fail, the final step is the one we do see on the news: overt military invasion. The justification is always freedom and democracy. But Perkins argues the motive is often to stabilize a region for the corporatocracy and eliminate a threat to the economic empire. This isn't just history. This system is more powerful than ever. While the U.S. pioneered this model, other nations like China have adopted it with their Belt and Road Initiative, creating their own web of debt and influence across Asia and Africa. And the tactics have even come home to roost. Critics argue that the same principles of crushing debt and corporate favoritism are now visible within Western nations, widening the wealth gap and consolidating power among a small elite. The language is always about development and aid, but the result is often the same: control and extraction. So, does America conquer the world without firing a single bullet? According to insiders like John Perkins, the answer is a resounding yes. The bullets are a last resort. What do you think? Is this a legitimate critique of power or an oversimplified conspiracy theory? We read every single comment, so let us know your thoughts, especially if you're from a country that's experienced this kind of economic influence.